James, you've traveled to 100 and something countries overseas. You've lived in a number of these countries. Have you noticed in your time traveling internationally if tariffs on American products has made a significant difference, pushed up prices?
Is the question basically like is it? Yeah, it's true. It's true that that there are a lot of countries that impose pretty high tariffs on U.S. products. Not just U.S. products, but a lot of products that they import. That's absolutely a true statement. That's absolutely a true statement. I mean, the gripe that you hear people talk about. I mean, JD Vance has talked about this. He said, "Well, it's not really fair. These guys tariff us. We don't tariff them." That, in many respects, is a true statement. What I would say is those countries are worse off for it. They are poorer. They're less prosperous. I think I told this story before in a previous episode, but there was a certain point I was living in Uruguay, and I was living in Punta del Este, Uruguay, which is a kind of bizarre place. It becomes like the most party central popular place in South America for like 6 weeks a year. And then it's like literally dead the rest of the time, the rest of the 10 and a half months out of the year. And anyways, Uruguay had these really bizarre import laws and import restrictions. And I remember there's a guy like, I mean, every single thing. So like if you go to the store and you would buy a dozen eggs, it was really, really cheap. Anything else that you would buy that they had to import, cars, televisions, a toaster oven, because they didn't really manufacture anything there, was just absurdly expensive, absurdly expensive. And cars were pretty like the worst off. And I remember there was a guy, he was a real estate agent. He was taking me around, showing me farmland and stuff like that. And he was telling me that he paid, this was a Ford F-150, back when Ford F-150 was like pretty cheap. You could buy one for like $20,000 probably. And he told me he paid $100,000 for this truck. So we're talking like 4 or 5 times more expensive than it should have been. And that was because of all the duties and the import tariffs and everything like that. And so what happened? Basically, nobody owned cars. Everybody had these little mopeds, and you'd see people throttling down the highway, dad in the front, mom in the back, 2 kids sandwiched in between, and the baby in the basket, which is so dangerous. And you would see just utter carnage on the highway all the time, every day. It was just bodies everywhere because people were sort of forced to exist in like some really unsafe conditions because the price of cars is so high. And so what ended up happening was they just did without. They just did without. And so people were worse off as a result because of these high tariffs. Or very smart, enterprising people went and found ways around it. They bought cars in Brazil, they bought cars in Paraguay, and they went and kind of drove the cars in, did all this sort of backdoor bootleg sort of stuff. And that's what ended up happening. And so the society as a whole was basically less prosperous. And that's the case, frankly, in so many places around the world because they have these restrictions. They're only screwing themselves. The US, basically, that didn't have these restrictions was better off as a result of that.
And they're not just paying the price in money. There's obviously other effects. You're talking about people actually dying because of these tariffs. It might be an extreme example, but still, these things happen, and it totally affects the way that people consume things. You were mentioning Colombia to me earlier as well as another place where Colombian coffee actually is cheaper for Americans than it is for Colombians because of the VAT tax. And, who's worse off when Colombia puts these tariffs on American-made cars?
Right. So you've got the US will manufacture things, it'll manufacture vehicles, it'll manufacture AI, it'll manufacture all sorts of things. Colombia manufactures things. It makes flowers, it makes coffee. It exports that stuff to the United States. And the US doesn't have all these crazy duties and import fees and things like that. So Americans get to enjoy Colombian coffee and nice, pretty flowers and all those things inexpensively. Colombians, on the other hand, if they want to buy U.S. automobiles, they have to pay out the nose for it. They want to buy, U.S. goods and services. They want to buy iPhones. They want to buy these things. It's a lot more expensive for them. It's very, very expensive. And it's because of the taxes. It's because of the taxes and the import duties. So as a result, Colombians are worse off and Americans get to enjoy all these nice things. And so that's sort of the idea. You can look at it and say, well, is it fair that these guys have these higher imports and these higher import duties and excise taxes and all these different things that make U.S. products more expensive out there? Yeah, it's unfair, but it's actually more unfair for the people in that country. They're worse off as a result of the duties and the tariffs and the fees and everything they charge. They screw themselves as a result of that stuff. And Americans are actually better off because they get to import that stuff cheaper. They're not paying, 22% VAT on some product, whatever, like they have to pay in Europe. They get to bring that stuff over to the US very inexpensively. And it's a question of like who's really worse off here as a result. Americans have the best lifestyle in the world. I mean, this is why everybody, this is why people go and walk thousands of miles, through the Andes, whatever, trying to make their way into the United States. Everybody wants to live in the US. Everybody wants to have this American lifestyle because Americans have the best lifestyle in the world in terms of all the stuff they get to consume and all of these things. If you sort of measure lifestyle by consumption, I personally don't, but a lot of people do. And Americans get to consume more than anybody else in the world. It's because all these other countries kind of screw themselves. They're saying, well, we want to have trade surpluses. We want to have all these things. And so they engineer these things with tariffs and duties and taxes and all these different things, but they only make themselves worse off. It's a cardinal rule that whatever you tax, you're going to get less of. If you tax vehicles, you're going to get fewer vehicles. If you tax coffee, you're going to get less coffee. All these things, it's just the nature of things. And so all these people in developing countries, they don't have cars, they don't have, whatever, nice phones. They don't have all these things that Americans get to enjoy. And the reason why is because of tariffs, because of import restrictions and duties and taxes and all these things. That's the reason why. And they're worse off for it. And so, Americans are now liberated from all these cheap goods and services that they used to get to enjoy. Now they get to pay more for that stuff. And so they get to join the lack of prosperity and share in that lack of prosperity along with the rest of the world.
But what's the argument in terms of exporting cars to Colombia? It's that the car manufacturers in the United States are at a disadvantage because now they have a smaller market to sell their cars in.
Sure. Like, so a country like Colombia, you've got 50 million people in this market. So it's a good sized market. Ford and General Motors could make an argument and go, well, when we're worse off because we don't get to sell as many cars as Colombia as we should be able to if the tariffs didn't exist, if the duties didn't exist and all those things. So now, okay, 350 million Americans get to pay more for like everything as a result so that Ford and General Motors could have a little bit more, sell a few more cars in Colombia.
We're supposed to now
Is that a
get
good
American
trade-off?
made. Yeah, are we supposed to get American made coffee now? Like, is that the idea that this is going to boost the American coffee industry? And in Kansas, we can start
Right, exactly.
growing
Yeah,
coffee in
yeah,
greenhouses,
yeah.
or
Exactly,
Hawaii
exactly.
and Puerto
Yeah,
Rico
north
handle
from
the.
from North Dakota to North Carolina, man, it's going to be coffee everywhere. I mean, obviously, it's absurd. Like this is the whole idea. This is what Adam Smith realized in 1776 when he published The Wealth of Nations. He said, this whole idea is stupid. Like, I have certain advantages, you have certain advantages. The Brits were trying to produce wine, and they realized, like, this is stupid. We're never going to be able to do this. The French could produce wine way better than the Brits. 7 days a week, no problem. The Brits had better technology in their textile manufacturing, and nobody else could keep up. So they said, okay, let's do what we do best. Let's use our machinery and our technology to produce textiles, ship those to the French, trade that for some cases of Bordeaux, and everybody's better off. Everybody wins. You do what you do best, I do what I do best, and everybody wins. That's actually, in terms of human history, a relatively recent phenomenon. Most of world history was this idea of mercantilism. I win because you lose. I become wealthy because I take from you. I take your land if you're a country. I take your land if you're a human being. I take your labor. This is where, I mean, the whole concept of slavery is very mercantilist in that way. I'm stealing from you. I'm stealing your time, your life, your labor, and I become wealthier as a result of that. That's the way, that was essentially the prevailing economic system for most of human history. And there were a few instances in which people sort of experienced and experimented with free markets, but it wasn't until 1776 and Adam Smith codified this. They were the French philosophes that came in and they said, well, there's a better way to do this. But Adam Smith really codified this and is why he's sort of the godfather of capitalism. Later on, it was, the Dutch gave this a try and they said, well, this is kind of interesting. And the Dutch Republic came out. They were a capitalist republic. But it was the United States that perfected this and took this to the highest possible level. And when the U.S. became the dominant superpower in 1944, at the end of World War II, they said, hey, free trade has to be a staple of this new world order. Free trade, global free trade has to be one of the most important parts of this new financial system, and we're all of us going to be better off. And what happened? The US became much better off, but so did the rest of the world. And Liberation Day was just this giant step backwards back into the days of mercantilism, where it's a zero-sum game. I win because you lose, and let's all find ways to just attack each other. That's not how you get prosperity. That's not how you get widespread global growth.
And you mentioned specializing in trading, and one of the weirdest things about some of these tariffs is who the largest tariffs are against. You mentioned Vietnam. Bangladesh, these Asian countries that are producing socks and underwear, a lot of
Cambodia,
apparel. Yeah.
Laos. Yeah. I mean, this is, I looked at that. I said, that's interesting. If you look at this map, I mean, we actually, we're involved in a company that actually does this, but they're in the Philippines, which was largely spared from a lot of this. But these other countries that are big in the apparel manufacturing. So Bangladesh, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, all these places have like 40, 50% tariffs. And you look at that and I go, I mean, this is the mainstay of their economy is manufacturing socks and underwear. And I'm looking at this going, what are you trying to say here? We should be manufacturing socks and underwear in the United States where everybody should put on their tidy whities and have Fruit of the Loom and have proudly made in America. I mean, what sense does that make? The US should be manufacturing robotics and AI and all the super high level, high quality, high value add products and services. Shouldn't be manufacturing underwear in the United States of America. What are you thinking by taking this away from Vietnam? And now we're going to have where everybody gets to pay now 3 times the price for socks and underwear until we have the power of American factories making socks and underwear and have American workers specializing in tidy whities. This is ludicrous. This is a complete waste of the talent and technology in the United States. And for what purpose? It completely escapes me.
Well, what about farmers? Does it actually help farmers? Because I know that was a main part of Trump's speech that this is going to protect the American farming industry.
Well, first of all, let's not forget who owns the most farmland in the United States of America. That's none other than the guy in my household is known as Billy Gates. One of the wealthiest guys on the planet is also the single largest farmland owner in the United States. And the tagline yesterday was, "This is a great day for farmers and ranchers." And you're like, oh, you mean like Bill Gates? Bill Gates is going to be super excited. It's Bill Gates, the farmer Bill is now going to have, oh, he's protected now from all this competition from, and you look around and it's like, the Europeans can't farm. In Europe, it's impossible to have a farm more than a couple of acres. They got so many taxes and so many regulations and all these things they got to deal with. U.S. farmers are already among the most productive on the planet. And it strikes me as just a repeat of the tariffs. They go back to the 1920s and 1930s. You go back to the Smoot-Hawley. They did the same thing, say, we got to protect the farmers. We got to protect the ranchers. Well, it's like, hold on a second. U.S. farmers and U.S. ranchers, this is in the aftermath of World War I. Europe was devastated. There's so many places that just, had their countrysides just bombarded and destroyed. Plus, they didn't have the technology that U.S. farmers and ranchers enjoyed. So U.S. farmers and ranchers were more productive than anybody else on the planet. And they still said, we got to protect the farmers. So they passed these tariffs that ended up in this gigantic trade war, and everybody got worse off. Everybody was poorer and really exacerbated the Great Depression. Now, they said this the other day. They said, oh, we're going to protect the farmers. This is a great day for farmers. And you go, no, farmers are going to be massively worse off as a result of this. And by the way, even if the goal was to support the farmers, there's like 7 farmers in the United States now and 350 million people who aren't farmers. So the 350 million people now get to pay higher prices so that we can protect the farmers who already get all these massive subsidies, state subsidies, federal subsidies, all these different things to help their businesses. And never mind the fact that most of the farming is controlled by some very large corporations and Billy Gates. So everybody else gets to pay more so that Monsanto and ADM and Bill Gates are apparently more prosperous as a result of this. What possible sense does that make? Again, another one of these things that completely escapes me.
You also mentioned, so some of the manufacturing that should happen in America is these higher tech items, but a lot of the imports to create those are still like the raw materials are still coming from Africa and other places that are going to be hit with tariffs, right?
Well, the entire world's going to be hit with tariffs here. So when you think about it, most economies, you've got very advanced economies that produce really, really high level, high margin, high value products like AI, software. These sorts of things, robotics, etc. Germany, you have Germany, the United States, the UK, France, Switzerland. These are service economies. These are very high value product economies. They're not the socks and underwear economies, right? Then you've got these kind of lower level economies. They produce the low value stuff. And then you've got basically like the resource-based economies. These are places like they don't really have a manufacturing base. They don't have the investment infrastructure. They don't have the skilled workforce. They don't have really anything. So what they're raw material economies. These are the guys that export lumber and iron and these sorts of things because that's all they can really do. And these are places that tend to be for the most part, tend to be the poorer countries in the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Central Asia, these sorts of places. And so, but at the end of the day, like everything that we consume, everything that we manufacture, the microphone that I'm talking into, the camera that I'm speaking into, all these things, they start with raw materials, right? They start with some chemical, some rock, something that grows out of the ground, something you have to extract from the ground, right? It's a rock thing, whatever. You gotta build it, you gotta extract it, you gotta mine it. Where does that stuff come from? It comes from countries that are now being tariffed. And they have a carve out, right? They have a carve out. There's a lot of different metals. They say, okay, we're going to have a carve out for copper. We're going to have a carve out for steel. But man, there's a lot of stuff that's not on there. There's a lot of stuff that's not on there, right? So you got to think about, they say, well, let's bring, iPhone, like Apple's got to bring iPhone manufacturing back to the United States. Okay. So let's say they start manufacturing iPhones in the US. They got a factory in the US. We're going to manufacture iPhones in the US. Where do you get iPhones from? You don't just clap your hands and iPhones fall from the sky. You got to have stuff. You got to have raw materials. You got to get the glass. Where does the glass come from? It comes from Corning. It's a silicate-based, chemically reinforced glass. So this Gorilla Glass from Corning, they got to get that material. What's the like number one silicon producer in the world? China. China produces like 90% of the world's silicons. There's 34% tariff on Chinese products. And there's all these different things, and maybe they have little carve outs here and there for that, but you impose these tariffs, and then you got to wonder, are these countries that actually have the raw materials, and they go, oh no, I gave you a carve out. Oh, you gave us a carve out on this one thing. Thanks. Guess what? We're not exporting to you anymore. Good luck finding the silicon. We produce 90% of it. Good luck finding it. Right. So it's one of these things that, like, are you even going to be able to get the materials that you need to produce the stuff in the United States? And if so, is that stuff going to be subject to tariffs? At which point, how is anybody better off from this? It just doesn't make any sense.
Don't the carve outs also just create more bureaucracy? Because instead of every item on this ship that's coming from whatever country being tariffed at X%, no, submit the paperwork for the carve outs. What percentage of this is aluminum and copper that isn't subject to the tariffs? It seems like you're going to need a lot more inspectors, huge bureaucracy,
It's going to be so complicated, right? Let's say you've got a company like Glencore, okay, Swiss commodities trader with a Panamanian flagged vessel sending lumber or sending iron out of Zimbabwe that's crewed by Danish sailors. What tariff rate do you apply to that? Okay, and then you got some stuff on there that's exempt from the tariffs, but then you got other stuff on there that's not exempt from the tariffs. And who's going to figure that out? Who's going to figure that out? And so every single time you have a new set of government regulations, new decrees, new laws, new legislation, these things that happen, two things go down. Number one is new bureaucracies are created, right? And this always happens. You go back to 2001, back when there was a big financial scandal, this big company called Enron. It turned out they were cooking the books and there was a big disaster there. So they passed this thing called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And out of that came this giant new bureaucracy, right? So you had all these people, these inspectors, the SEC got buffed up, and you had all these new inspectors and investigators coming out, looking at everybody's books and doing all these things.
And fraud disappeared.
Yes, and there was never fraud ever again as a result of that, right? I mean, obviously it's a joke because it never actually has its intended purpose. Every time you have this, there's always this new series of inspectors that comes in. And so in this particular case, just the enormity of the customs bureaucracy, it's going to grow so significantly. You're going to have all these people that are smuggling freaking microchips up their ass, trying to come to the United States, which supposedly there's a carve out for semiconductors, which is great because we also are involved in the semiconductor business. But all these things that people are going to try and smuggle as a result of that, and the police presence, the customs presence, all these things. So that's number one, is the bureaucracy always grows. The second thing that happens is, so that means basically the bureaucrats are better off. But the second thing that happens is it's the lawyers, it's the blood-sucking lawyers that are better off, because every time some new thing happens, it's the lawyers, it's the auditors, it's the whatever. It's these guys who sort of trade on bureaucracy. They get enriched on bureaucracy. They do extremely well. And this happens all the time. You go back to, again, Sarbanes-Oxley in 2001. All of a sudden, there are these consulting firms that popped out of nowhere and said, oh, I'm the expert in this new law, and I can help you navigate this. When the Corporate Transparency Act came out and went into force supposedly on January 1st, 2024, I can't tell you how many emails I got from all these lawyers came out of the woodwork, guys I hadn't talked to in years, and said, oh, we can get you squared away on your Corporate Transparency Act. It's like, of course you can. At $1,000 an hour, of course, you'd be delighted to charge me $1,000 an hour to file this paperwork for me. So this is the sort of thing that always is going to happen. I was talking to the CEO or the CFO of this semiconductor company that we're involved in just a little bit ago, and I go, well, what do you think? He said, well, it's supposedly a carve out, but I don't know. Maybe we should reach out to some lawyers and figure this out. I go, yeah, of course, for $1,000 an hour, they'd be happy to advise us on this. But this is what happens. It's just they pass these things. They have their like nifty little table. They show up as like a prop, but everybody's just left with questions. Is I don't understand any of this. Nobody understands it. So the bureaucrats do well, and the expert class, the self-anointed expert class, once again, it's another victory for the expert class that's supposedly going to help all the rest of us intellectual peasants navigate this Byzantine tariff structure. And again, none of this makes any sense. It doesn't make anybody else better off. Everybody's worse off as a result.
Yeah. And when you start looking at the map of, who got hit with these tariffs and how high they are, and you see South America is actually pretty low. And it seems like the United States might be trying to bring South America back into its loving arms, except then you look into Asia and it's just high across the board. Even Japan's getting hit with high tariffs, and that's one of our closest allies, somebody that the US needs in that region of the world to counter China's influence. And this seems like this is just going to drive all those countries back into the arms of China.
I would agree with that. I mean, if your sort of arch enemy, if your nemesis is out there in the Pacific, you would think you would want all those countries in the Pacific to be on your side. And instead, what do? They said not only China, okay, fine. They said Taiwan, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, all these countries are supposed to be allies. Said tariff, 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 tariff. And then they went to China's backyard. And they said Mongolia, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Thailand, all these places, tariff, 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 tariff. These countries are like, what the hell? What the hell?
What did Mongolia do?
What? Yeah, I mean, what did Lesotho do? This little tiny, teensy tiny little country. It's an exclave. It's completely surrounded by South Africa. It's a dot, and they have a 50% tariff. And I'm like, dude, what did these guys do to piss off Donald Trump so bad? They got hit with a 50% tariff. My God, this is one of the poorest countries in the world, and they got hit with a 50% tariff. This is nothing. Their entire economy is like $10 a year. It's a nothing. And I just, so it's. But you look at all these other countries, again, in Southeast Asia, in the South Pacific, Indochina, in the South China Sea, South Korea, Japan, all these countries, you would think you want all these guys in lockstep, blood brothers, sworn loyalty to your cause, and you just forsake all these guys and left the door wide open for the Chinese to say, hey, we have a 1.2 billion people consumer market. Why don't you come party over here? It's nice. The water's nice. Come on in. We're bringing the drinks, and we'll treat you nice. And people look around going, oh, yeah, okay, I'll get along with that. I'll get along with it. Oh, by the way, China's going to go, by the way, those guys in the United States that you want to cozy up to so badly, not only have they just smacked you down with this ridiculous tariff, they also have $36 trillion in debt, and things aren't going particularly well. So why don't you come and, you can sell in our market, we'll make a deal. And this just plays exactly into what is good for China. It helps China put itself back on the world stage. The world's looking for some economic superpower that they can have some trust and reliance on. And for the longest time, nobody's wanted to trust the Chinese. Nobody wants to get in bed with the Chinese. Everybody's still pissed off about the Chinese over COVID and Wuhan and all this stuff. Well, now people are like, let's move past that. What are you going to do if you're Vietnam? You're just going to take it in the teeth and accept this, 49% tariff, whatever it is? Or you're going to run to the Chinese and say, hey, Xi Jinping, let's do a deal. I mean, it's obviously in your economic interest to do something like that. And so it just makes the US worse off and creates waning power in that region.
So then what happens next?
Well, the hope is that everybody takes it on the chin. Everybody says, okay, fine, we'll just suck up the tariffs. And foreign companies take a hit in their profitability. Foreign central banks devalue their currency. Foreign governments don't retaliate with higher tariffs of their own. They don't do anything at all. You would have to expect U.S. consumers to be very patient and obliging and say, hooray, we're all going to be better off. They'll have to believe the narrative that higher prices as a result of tariffs are transitory and temporary, and that the prices that might go higher now are going to come back down. And you would need U.S. companies to have this sort of bonanza investment expansion of building factories across the United States. You'd need this almost like World War II Rosie the Riveter. You need all these 20-year-olds that are now posting butt selfies for a living to put the iPhone down, put the Instagram down, and go and start making socks and underwear in U.S. factories. That's what's going to make this work. Is that going to happen? I'm not going to be here holding my breath. That's for sure. Right. You
Well,
need
maybe if
all of
they
those
put the
things to
tariffs
happen.
on the foreigners doing the butt selfies, then that'll thrive, make the American industry thrive.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe that's what it is. But I think all that is just, it's very unlikely because you need US consumers. I was actually reading this about the semiconductor industry saying, do you think, is this going to make people want to manufacture in the United States? And a lot of people saying, no, because I don't believe these tariffs are going to be permanent. So you need businesses to believe that these tariffs are going to be permanent. And that's the problem of crying wolf so many times, is that this administration has already demonstrated. They say, oh, we're going to do it. No, we're going to pull back. Oh, no, we're going to do it. No, we're going to pull back. We're going to do it. We're going to pull back. And now people go, I don't know what to believe anymore. Is this serious? Is this permanent? Or are they going to change their minds again in 3 weeks and we're going to have a completely different regime? And if you're a business and you've got to make a $10 billion investment commitment to build new factories and new technology and hire people and change your entire supply chain and all that stuff, are you really going to do that based on administration that's demonstrated that they're going to flip-flop back and forth between tariffs and not tariffs and back on tariffs and not tariffs? Because do you really want to be $5 billion into a $10 billion domestic manufacturing expansion project and come to find out, just kidding, we changed all the rules again and we're going to go back to the way it used to be? Who's the idiot in that case, right? So who wants to go and risk all of that capital and all that shareholder value on something that might change literally tomorrow? So this is why I don't think it's really likely. Not to mention, again, we talked about before, even companies that want to do that, you still got to navigate the Byzantine permitting process of state and local governments. You got to go and do all of the environmental studies and all. I mean, it's like you're years away from having all these factories come online, where even if you are able to get all these companies to spend the money, you're able to get the 20-year-old kids to put down the butt selfies and come into the factories to make socks and underwear in America again. It's still going to be 2 years before you can navigate all the permitting in the state of California. And good luck with that. You can't even build a fast food franchise anymore, let alone a factory, something that's actually going to have a much deeper environmental permitting footprint and all these things. So, I mean, again, I'm not holding my breath. I'm not really optimistic about this. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, if they were going to get serious about trying to enforce this and building the bureaucracy around it, generally things tend to escalate. We talked about earlier how tariffs can even cause deaths. And then during the 90s, when prohibition, they made alcohol illegal. And obviously that caused a lot of deaths. The whole organized crime, rose out of it. So is there a chance that they continue just to escalate and they start controlling, capital controls, where you can even put your money? Can you not invest in foreign factories anymore if you're an American, that sort of thing?
Look, history is very clear. We wrote recently about Ptolemaic Egypt after Alexander the Great died, and one of his generals and personal bodyguards, this guy named Ptolemy, he ended up taking over Egypt and turned it into this dynasty that lasted a couple of centuries. And they had really one of the most advanced economies in the world. They had better technology than everybody else. They were exporting as far away as China. I mean, it's thriving. And even though they had all these competitive advantages over other kingdoms, they said, we got to protect the farmers. We got to protect our domestic industries. And so they started imposing all these tariffs, which were frankly not uncommon at the time. But what ended up happening was it just made prices, it created inflation in the kingdom. Prices got a lot higher. It created disputes. It created, and the thing is, history is very clear on this point. The bureaucracy just exploded. They had scribes everywhere writing down every single thing, every transaction, every import, collecting taxes on everything, just armies and armies of scribes. But history is very clear on this point that trade disputes often evolve and escalate very quickly into other things. And so I look at this and look at this and say, like, is Xi Jinping just going to bow very courteously and say, okay, yeah, we'll take it. 34% tariffs on top of the 20% tariffs before. Yeah, sure, we'll take it. Or do they say, all right, we're not going to ship you rare earths anymore. We're the biggest rare earth miner in the world. You're not getting rare earths anymore. So kiss your iPhone goodbye. Kiss all of your electronics goodbye. You don't get any of that stuff anymore. We've got the lock on it. We're going to keep it. We're not shipping it to you anymore. Or do they say, all right, I'm just going to bring down your power grid. We're going to have our hackers go and so, I mean, they had the whole thing with the balloons, the hot air balloons floating over American military bases and all this stuff. I mean, we'll just take that to the next level. Let's just cyber attack America. Let's start simple. Let's bring down an airline reservation system. Then let's bring down, let's hack a few medium-sized banks. Then let's escalate higher, bring down a little like kind of mini part of the power grid somewhere, and just, make these people go crazy. And we're just going to sit there the whole time, just messing with them until we bring them to their knees, until they bow to us. I mean, there's so many things and ways that people can retaliate. And of course, the normal things like imposing tariffs on the US. We go back to the 1930s and the Smoot-Hawley led trade wars where everybody just said, we're going to increase our tariffs on you and you and you. And it got so high that global trade collapsed that really exacerbated the Great Depression. I think we could see countries retaliate against Americans by canceling visa-free travel. So forget about going to Italy this summer or whatever, these sorts of things. I mean, we could see that sort of thing. We could see, I think we could see capital controls. I think you could see a lot of foreigners pull their money out of the United States, foreign governments, foreign banks, foreign central banks, pulling their money out of treasury bonds, out of US government securities, and this capital flight. And suddenly the Treasury Department says, we got to put a stop to this. So they impose capital controls. They freeze assets in the US, all these things. And that just escalates. You start seeing asset expropriation overseas. Oh, you're a US company with foreign assets. Well, now the foreign government goes and seizes those assets. All in this. You see how easily all this stuff can just escalate. You do something to me, I do something to you, and eventually everybody just forgets how did this even start? Years and years go by, everybody forgets how it even started because it's escalated so much. And then to that point, you get lucky if it doesn't turn into a shooting war. So, I'm not trying to be dramatic here, but it'd just be naive to literally 5,000 years of human history to assume that one country can impose a tariff on literally the entire world and there's never going to be any consequences forever and ever until the end of time. Okay, that's just a stupid and naive view. There's a very kind of limited chance that the blowback and the consequences are limited or minor, but there's a lot of chance that there's just all sorts of unforeseen and unintended consequences that we can't even begin to imagine right now. And that's something that's absolutely on the agenda. We just got to keep looking out for that stuff.
Well, thank you for your insights, James.
Okay, thanks, Joe.